The rain poured relentlessly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harper Tower, the headquarters of Harper Innovations. The city lights blurred through the downpour, casting a faint glow across the room. I sat at the head of the conference table, my fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Across from me, my younger brother, Daniel, leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed and a smug grin plastered across his face. His dark eyes, so much like mine, gleamed with a confidence that made my stomach churn. He had always been the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of anything. But tonight, his charm felt like a weapon. "Congratulations, Emily," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "The board has voted. You're out. I'm the new CEO of Harper Innovations." I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Instead, I let the silence stretch, my eyes locked on his. I could see the flicker of doubt in his expression, the way his grin faltered just slightly. He had expected me to explode, to scream, to beg. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "Check page 412 of the company bylaws," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I flipped open the leather-bound portfolio in front of me and slid it across the table toward him. "You might find it enlightening." Daniel's brow furrowed, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. He reached for the portfolio, his fingers trembling ever so slightly as he flipped to the page I had indicated. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of paper as he scanned the text. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. His eyes darted across the page, his confidence wavering with each word he read. "It's the succession clause," I said, leaning back in my chair. My tone was calm, almost casual, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "It states that any new CEO must have at least 10 years of executive experience in a tech company. You've been with Harper Innovations for what, 3 years? And as head of marketing, no less." Daniel's face turned pale. He slammed the portfolio shut and glared at me. "This is just a technicality. We can amend the clause." I shook my head slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of my lips. "No, Daniel. We can't. That clause was written into the founding documents. It would require a unanimous vote from all shareholders to change it. And as the majority shareholder, I'm not voting for that." The room erupted into murmurs. The board members, people I had handpicked, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most of them couldn't meet my gaze. Only Sarah, our chief legal counsel, held my eye. She gave me a small nod, her expression unreadable. Daniel's jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He had always been like this, reckless, impulsive, always banking on charm and our family name to smooth over any obstacles. But this time, he had gone too far. "This isn't over," he spat, pushing back from the table. His chair screeched against the floor, the sound echoing in the tense silence. "No, Daniel," I said, standing to face him. "It's just beginning." He stormed out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The remaining board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the door. I let the silence linger, let them stew in their guilt, before I finally spoke. "Now," I said, pressing my palms flat against the cool table, "let's discuss why a special board meeting was called without notifying the CEO." The next hour was an exercise in discomfort. Excuses tumbled forth, concerns about my focus on research and development, my hesitation to take the company public, my so-called lack of vision. I listened patiently, my expression neutral, as they tried to justify their betrayal. And then, one by one, I dismantled their weak justifications with surgical precision. By the end of the meeting, 3 board members had resigned. I accepted their departures with a gracious nod, already knowing that Sarah had replacements lined up. As the room emptied, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what had just happened. My own brother had tried to take the company I had built from the ground up. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, gazing out at the city's skyline. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the buildings. In the distance, I could see the iconic spire of the city's tallest tower, a reminder of why I had chosen to build Harper Innovations here instead of Silicon Valley. I had always done things my way, even if it meant standing alone. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Sarah entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one down on my desk and took a seat across from me. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice quiet. "About 3 weeks," she admitted. "Daniel asked me to review the succession procedures. He didn't realize I helped write them." I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. Of course he hadn't. Daniel had never been one for due diligence. He had always relied on charm and charisma to get his way. But this time, it wasn't going to work. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I glanced down to see a text from Daniel. "You might have won this round, but don't get too comfortable. There's more than one way to take control of this company." I showed the text to Sarah, who raised an eyebrow. "Would you like me to start documenting everything?" she asked. "Please," I said. "And set up meetings with our major shareholders. They need to understand exactly what happened today." As Sarah left, I pulled up the company's founding documents on my computer. Page 412. My insurance policy. I had written it after watching a friend lose her startup to an unqualified but politically savvy rival. I had never imagined I'd be using it against my own brother. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, shareholder calls, and internal audits. By the end of the week, I was exhausted, but the company was secure for now. As I walked to my car in the underground garage, I heard the familiar click of heels echoing behind me. I turned to see Daniel leaning against a concrete pillar, his arms crossed. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I met his gaze, my expression calm. "Is that what you told the board? That I'm too cautious? Too focused on sustainable growth instead of reckless expansion?" I told them the truth, he snapped. "You're holding Harper Innovations back. We could be 10 times bigger by now if you weren't so obsessed with control." I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Control? You mean like staging a coup?" He took a step forward, his eyes blazing. "You left me no choice. Every time I suggested change, you dismissed me. Someone had to act, and that someone had to be me." I tilted my head, studying him. "And how's that working out for you?" For a moment, he looked ready to argue, but then he exhaled, forcing himself to regain his composure. "This isn't over, Emily. You won because of some fine print, but there are other ways to force change. Remember that." I watched him walk away, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. My brother, the boy I had grown up with, the one I had trusted, was gone. In his place was someone who would sacrifice family for power. The war had only just begun. The battle lines are drawn. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, the rain still falling in sheets outside. The building was quiet, the hum of computers and the faint scent of coffee filling the air. I made my way to my office, where Sarah was already waiting for me. "Good morning," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "I've compiled the preliminary reports on Daniel's activities over the past few months. There's a lot to go through." I nodded, taking the coffee and setting it on my desk. "Let's get started." We spent the next few hours poring over the reports. Daniel had been busy, meeting with shareholders, leaking confidential information, and even reaching out to competitors. It was a calculated effort to undermine my authority and position himself as the savior of Harper Innovations. "He's been careful," Sarah said, her brow furrowed. "Most of this is circumstantial. We'll need concrete evidence if we're going to stop him." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Daniel had always been clever, but this was a new level of cunning. He was playing a dangerous game, and I needed to stay one step ahead. "Keep digging," I said finally, "and set up a meeting with the board. They need to see what's really going on." Sarah nodded, making a note on her tablet. "I'll get it done." As she left, I turned to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The city looked different in the storm, darker and more foreboding. It felt like a reflection of the battle I was facing. The family divide. That evening, I arrived at my parents' house, the familiar craftsman-style home I had grown up in. The rain had let up, but the air was still heavy with moisture. I could see the warm glow of the lights through the windows, and for a moment I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready for this conversation. But I didn't have a choice. Daniel had already been here, spinning his version of events. I could see it in the way my mother greeted me at the door, her smile tight and her eyes filled with concern. "Emily," she said, pulling me into a hug. "We need to talk." I followed her into the living room, where my father was sitting in his favorite armchair, his expression unreadable. Daniel was there too, leaning against the fireplace, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. "What's this about you blocking Daniel from advancing in the company?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with accusation. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's an interesting way to describe Daniel's attempted hostile takeover." My father's eyes narrowed. "Hostile takeover?" "Daniel said the board voted for new leadership because you've been making reckless decisions." I shook my head, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Did he mention that he orchestrated the vote without notifying me? Or that it violates company bylaws? Or that he doesn't even meet the qualifications for the role?" My mother waved a hand dismissively. "Qualifications can change, Emily. He's trying to help. He says Harper Innovations is stagnating because you refuse to take risks." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Let me be clear. Daniel tried to steal my company today. He failed because I had safeguards in place. That's not help, that's betrayal." My father's face darkened. "No one's stealing anything. The board simply thinks it's time for fresh leadership." "The board," I said, my voice steady, "was manipulated into an illegal vote. 3 members have already resigned rather than face legal consequences." That got their attention. My mother sank into a chair, her face pale. My father's jaw tightened. "Legal consequences? You'd sue your own brother." "If necessary, yes," I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. "I built this company. I won't let anyone destroy it, family or not." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Daniel's grin had faded, replaced by a look of anger. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's expression was unreadable. "Emily," my mother said finally, her voice trembling, "you've always been so stubborn. Always had to do everything your way. Daniel says you won't even consider his ideas." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "His ideas? Like the $5 million marketing campaign with zero research? Or jumping into cryptocurrency before we've even gone public?" "Those ideas." My mother turned to my father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "See? She dismisses everything Daniel suggests." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I dismiss bad ideas. That's my job." My father's voice was quiet but firm. "Maybe it shouldn't be anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, the man who had taught me about business ethics, who had encouraged me to build something of my own. "You've made Harper Innovations your whole life," he continued. "Maybe it's time to step back and let Daniel take over." I felt a surge of anger, but I forced it down. Daniel has less than 3 years of real experience. He orchestrated a backroom deal. That's who you want running a $50 million company. He has fresh ideas, my mother insisted. He understands what young people want. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Fresh ideas? Like the $5 million marketing campaign with zero research? Or jumping into cryptocurrency before we've even gone public? Those ideas. My mother turned to my father, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "See? She dismisses everything Daniel suggests." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I dismiss bad ideas. That's my job. And if Daniel had done his job, we wouldn't be in this mess." My father's expression darkened. "Emily, you've always been so stubborn. Always had to do everything your way. Maybe it's time to consider that your way isn't the only way." I felt a pang of hurt, but I pushed it aside. This isn't about me being stubborn. This is about Daniel trying to take control of a company he hasn't earned the right to lead. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's jaw tightened. Daniel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Emily, you're so focused on control that you can't see the bigger picture," he said, his voice calm but laced with venom. "Harper Innovations could be 10 times bigger if you weren't so obsessed with micromanaging every detail." I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. "And your solution is to stage a coup? To manipulate the board and leak confidential information?" That's your idea of leadership. Daniel's face flushed, but he didn't back down. I did what I had to do. You left me no choice. I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. You always have a choice, Daniel. You chose to betray me. You chose to put your ambition above this company and this family. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Enough. This is tearing us apart. Can't you two see that? I looked at her, my heart aching. Mom, I'm not the one tearing this family apart. Daniel is. He's the one who tried to steal my company. He's the one who's been lying and manipulating everyone. My father's voice was quiet but firm. Emily, you need to understand something. This company isn't just yours. It's a part of this family. And if you can't find a way to work with Daniel, then maybe it's time for you to step aside. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Step aside? After everything I've built? After everything I've sacrificed? My father's expression was unreadable. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for something you love is to let it go. I stared at him, my mind racing. Let it go? After everything I'd done to build Harper Innovations from the ground up? After all the late nights, the sacrifices, the battles I'd fought to keep this company alive? I couldn't just let it go. But as I looked at my parents, at the disappointment in their eyes, I realized something. This wasn't just about the company anymore. This was about family. And if I didn't find a way to fix this, I might lose both. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my mind still reeling from the confrontation with my parents. I needed a plan, something to counter Daniel's moves and protect Harper Innovations. But more than that, I needed to find a way to expose the truth, not just to the board, but to my parents. Sarah was already at her desk when I walked in, her eyes lighting up as she saw me. Emily, I've been going through Daniel's emails and financial records. There's something you need to see. I followed her into her office, where she had a stack of papers spread out on the table. What is it? I asked, my heart pounding. Sarah handed me a sheet of paper, her expression grim. Daniel's been in contact with TechVantage Solutions. They've been discussing a potential merger. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. TechVantage was one of our biggest competitors, known for acquiring struggling companies and gutting them for parts. If Daniel was talking to them, it could only mean one thing. He was planning to sell Harper Innovations out from under me. This is bad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If Daniel gets his way, he'll destroy everything we've built. Sarah nodded. There's more. I've been tracking his expenses, and there are some irregularities. He's been funneling company funds into a private account. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough to raise red flags. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over. That's it. We have everything we need to take him down. Sarah hesitated. Emily, are you sure you want to do this? Once we expose Daniel, there's no going back. This could destroy your family. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Sarah was right. Exposing Daniel would mean burning bridges with my parents, with my brother, with everyone I cared about. But if I didn't act, Harper Innovations would be destroyed, and with it, everything I'd worked for. I don't have a choice, I said finally. If I don't stop Daniel, he'll destroy this company. And I can't let that happen. Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. Then let's do it. The board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and I knew it would be the most important moment of my career. I spent the morning preparing, going over every detail, every piece of evidence. I had to be perfect. I had to be ready. When the time came, I walked into the boardroom with my head held high. Daniel was already there, sitting at the head of the table with a smug grin on his face. The board members were seated around him, their expressions unreadable. I could feel their eyes on me, weighing, judging. They had already made up their minds, or so they thought. Emily, Daniel said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. So glad you could join us. I ignored him, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table. Let's get started, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. The meeting began with the usual updates, financial reports, project timelines, shareholder concerns. But I could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Everyone knew why we were here. This wasn't just a routine meeting. This was a battle for control of Harper Innovations. Finally, Daniel stood, his grin widening. As you all know, there have been some concerns about the direction of Harper Innovations. I've been working tirelessly to address these concerns, and I believe it's time for a change in leadership. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. I could see the board members exchanging glances, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel had been busy, whispering in ears, making promises, and twisting the narrative to his advantage. I stood, my voice calm but firm. Before we proceed, there's something you all need to see. I handed out copies of the document Sarah and I had prepared, watching as the board members' expressions shifted from curiosity to shock. Daniel's grin faltered as he realized what was happening. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is evidence of your misconduct. Emails discussing a merger with TechVantage. Financial records showing you've been funneling company funds into a private account. And let's not forget the illegal board meeting you orchestrated to try and take control of this company." The room erupted into murmurs, the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel's face turned pale, his confidence crumbling. "This is ridiculous," he spat, his voice trembling. "These documents are fake. Emily's just trying to discredit me because she's afraid of losing control." I shook my head, my expression calm. "The evidence speaks for itself, Daniel. And if you'd like, we can involve the SEC in this investigation. I'm sure they'd be very interested in your activities." Daniel's face flushed, but he didn't respond. The board members were silent, their eyes darting between me and Daniel. Finally, one of them spoke. "Emily, what do you propose we do?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I propose that Daniel be removed from his position immediately, and that we take steps to ensure this kind of misconduct never happens again." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Daniel's face was pale, his hands trembling. He knew he had lost. But just as the board was about to vote, the door to the boardroom burst open. A man in a sharp suit walked in, flanked by 2 security guards. I recognized him immediately, James Cooper, the CEO of TechVantage Solutions. "Sorry to interrupt," Cooper said, his voice smooth and confident. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The room froze. Daniel's eyes lit up with hope, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What was Cooper doing here? "Mr. Cooper," I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. "This is a private board meeting. You have no business here." Cooper smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Actually, I do. You see, Daniel and I have been in discussions about a potential merger between Harper Innovations and TechVantage. And based on the information he's provided, it seems your company is in dire need of new leadership." I felt a surge of anger, but I forced it down. This was a calculated move, designed to undermine me in front of the board. I couldn't let him win. "Mr. Cooper," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "I'm afraid Daniel has been misleading you. Harper Innovations is not for sale. And as for his so-called leadership, the evidence speaks for itself." Cooper's smile faltered, but he didn't back down. "Be that as it may, I think the board should hear what I have to say. After all, a merger could be exactly what this company needs to reach its full potential." I glanced at the board members, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. I knew I had to act fast. If Cooper got his way, Harper Innovations would be swallowed up by TechVantage, and everything I'd built would be destroyed. "Mr. Cooper," I said, my voice firm, "this company is not for sale. And if you'd like to discuss this further, I suggest you make an appointment. But for now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Cooper's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. He turned on his heel and walked out, the security guards following close behind. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I turned back to the board, my heart pounding. "Now," I said, my voice steady, "let's finish this." The board voted unanimously to remove Daniel from his position. He left the room without a word, his head bowed in defeat. The board members followed soon after, leaving me alone in the room. I sank into my chair, my mind racing. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The cost had been too high. My family was fractured, my relationship with Daniel irreparably damaged. But Harper Innovations was safe, and that was what mattered. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, my heart aching. The battle with Daniel was over, but the war with my family was just beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, shareholder calls, and damage control. Daniel's resignation was made public, and the fallout was immediate. The media had a field day, speculating about the future of Harper Innovations and the Morrison family. My parents were furious. They couldn't understand why I had exposed Daniel, why I had chosen the company over family. But I didn't have the luxury of explaining myself. I had a company to run, a reputation to rebuild. And then there was James Cooper. He didn't give up easily. TechVantage launched a hostile takeover bid, trying to capitalize on the chaos. But I was ready. With Sarah's help, I rallied the shareholders, reminding them of Harper Innovations' potential and the importance of staying independent. It was a long, grueling battle, but in the end, we won. TechVantage withdrew their bid, and Harper Innovations emerged stronger than ever. Just when I thought the worst was over, I received an unexpected visitor. It was late, and I was alone in my office, going over the final details of our new product launch. There was a knock at the door, and I looked up to see Daniel standing there. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet. "I need your help." I felt a surge of anger, but I forced it down. "My help? After everything you've done?" Daniel's face was pale, his eyes filled with desperation. "I know I messed up. I know I betrayed you. But I'm in trouble, Emily. Serious trouble." I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed. "What kind of trouble?" Daniel hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Cooper. He's not who you think he is. He's been using me to get to Harper Innovations, but now that the merger's off the table, he's coming after me. He's got evidence, things I did, things I can't explain. If he goes public, I'm ruined." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying I need your help," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only one who can stop him." I stared at him, my mind racing. This was the brother I had grown up with, the one I had trusted. But he had betrayed me, betrayed the company, betrayed everything we had built. And yet, he was still my brother.